what are the different types of trauma, for want of a better word? And I know that you can go on for ages, but give us the crux of your definition.
Okay. So the main difference, so there's basically two kinds of trauma that we're working with at the moment in kind of our culture. We're talking about PTSD, which is like a one-off trauma. So that's like a car accident. And the easiest way I can explain that is when I was about 9, I was in a car accident. And for about 5-6 weeks after that car accident, if I saw a car coming out and I was going along like this, my body would have a reaction and I would jump. And so it wasn't my logical frontal lobes that were saying, jump and that car might hit me. It was actually something deeper. It was in my body. It was in my nervous system that was making me jump. And after about 5 to 6 weeks, I noticed that it faded off, that it kind of, it integrated, it resolved, and I stopped doing that. So that's a one-off trauma. So it could be a car accident, it could be a fall that you have, or some big shock, something that is a shock at the time and something that usually you'll have some kind of memories of or panic around the situation that will go on for a while. So complex trauma is something that's being talked about a lot now in the field of psychology, and it is so exciting, because they're starting to establish that this can be the foundation for so many other issues that people have in their adult lives. So complex trauma is multiple events that happen, often as a child, and often in an environment where we can't get out of it. So there's this feeling of kind of being trapped in we call it the trauma vortex. You're kind of trapped in the trauma vortex. And often it happens relationally. Right? So it's often a relational trauma. Now, the other things I wanted to bring up just quickly is that complex trauma will often lead to attachment issues. So we can have a secure attachment style, and that's how we form relationships with people. It's how we've learned to form relationships, or what's called one of the insecure attachment styles. And that comes from our parents or from our primary caregivers. It's how their nervous system has helped to regulate or been unable to help regulate our own nervous system. Yeah. So we're not born being able to regulate our own nervous system. We have to learn it from somebody else. So if we've had parents who have been able to stay grounded and stable while you as a child panic and have something happen, then you learn how to regulate yourself. But if we've had parents who are maybe traumatized themselves and their own nervous system is dysregulated, then they're unable to give that to their children. And that's one of the ways that trauma can actually be transferred intergenerationally. Yeah. Now, another quick thing around complex trauma is often there can be a freeze response in complex trauma because we're not able to get out of the situation. And that can bring up a lot of feelings of shame. So shame is also inherently part of that whole piece, sort of around complex trauma. And it's very difficult to stay in the body because one of our safety mechanisms, if we can't physically get out of the situation that we're in, is for different parts of the body and psyche to shut down so that we can kind of get out of the situation, even though our body can't get out of the situation. So that's called disassociation. But that's something else that can kind of come out of this thing that's called complex trauma. And there's lots of different, it could be neglect, that could count as a type of complex trauma, or it can be really severe abuse. So there's sort of a spectrum as well.
Yeah, I was going to ask that if there was a spectrum. I mean, if I can just put you on notice, because there's one thing I want to ask after I speak to Faith and Avanti, is why it's important for us to know our attachment styles. If you could just have a think of that. I have my view, but I'm really interested. And what I love is how you made that connection of us transferring our trauma through, I know this is a buzzword, intergenerational trauma, for want of a better word. But I guess I'm just going to put you on notice there. Thank you so much for giving that explanation. I think the important thing is that there is a whole spectrum of trauma. And another question I have is, where do we think we fit in that, and where does the healing begin? But thank you for that, Jen.